We are now going to go into the deepest part of Dante's Hell. As I mentioned earlier, Dante's Inferno has 34 cantos, 33 in the Paradiso, 33 in the Purgatorio, so 100 cantos in all. And we're going to be talking about canto 33, so one from the very end. And remember, we're talking about the circle of fraud. And fraud, betrayal, treachery, these are, in Dante's book, the worst kinds of sins. Far worse than sins of incontinence, which were the early cantos, sins of violence, which were the middle cantos. And now we're kind of in the circle of, well, Dante, you can call it complex fraud. And complex fraud is distinguishable from simple fraud. So simple fraud is the con man who puts a fast one over somebody else and takes advantage of them and perpetrates a kind of deceit or fraud on them. Complex fraud occurs when there are people who have deep obligations to others. So a good example of this would be, for example, a bishop or a churchman who takes money for a particular purpose. Let's say, for example, to go on a pilgrimage or to do, and then ends up spending the money on themselves. They would be betraying a trust amongst for someone to whom they have a kind of bond. Or if somebody betrays their own family or their own children, which Dante's book ranks about as bad as you can get. And we're going to talk about this exact issue in this canto. One really interesting thing about Dante's Divine Comedy is that although we associate hell, and even the Bible associates hell with fire. Fire is the kind of predominant metaphor, the fire of hell, hell and brimstone. Dante does use fire and hell. We've talked about souls being encased in flames. We've talked about landscapes that have been so burned that they're parched, and in fact even the faces of sinners that have been so burned that you can see the burn marks on their face. So Dante is not reluctant to use fire, but fire is not his big trope here in Inferno. In fact, very interestingly, as you get to the very depths of hell, it's pure ice. It is cold. It's isolated, and the sinners are sort of encased or encrusted in ice. In fact, the ice kind of clogs up their ears. It blocks their eyes. Apparently, they shed tears, and the tears then freeze and prevent them from being able to see. And in the very depths of hell, you have Satan. And Satan has on one side Brutus and on the other side Cassius. A little bit of a surprise to people who have been sort of raised on, Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, where Brutus and Cassius are presented as conspirators, to be sure, and traitors in a sense, to be sure, but as traitors who saw themselves as fighting against tyranny. Now, Cassius is clearly, in Shakespeare's view, the more envious character, Brutus perhaps the more noble character, but nevertheless, you can read Julius Caesar kind of two ways, and many readers come across thinking of Julius Caesar as a great man and Brutus and Cassius as these sort of lesser suspect, dubious characters who tried to get rid of him. But there's a whole bunch of other readers, and I would say myself included, that take a more ambiguous and much more sympathetic view, not only of Brutus, but also of Cassius. And that is Shakespeare's portrait, which comes through Plutarch and other sources. This is not Dante's source. Dante's view is completely different. Dante is actually a defender of empire, and a defender of empire not in its own sake. The empire is good. It's good to have, but Dante's view here is that an empire in which a Christian monarch is able to sort of carry the Christian message throughout the world and rule justly with admittedly unlimited power. This is Dante's vision sort of how the earth should be ruled from Rome. Dante is very emphatic, however, that the Pope and the religious authorities manage the spiritual domain, that they should not be active in the earthly domain. And let's remember that Dante's own exile is when the Pope sends troops, turns out to be French troops, into northern Italy, and Dante, as a sort of as a Guelph, is thrown out. He's a white Guelph, and the black Guelphs take power, and Dante is sent into what turns out to be permanent exile. He lives in Verona, he lives in Ravenna, and he dies there. When we come back, I'm going to go back now into the specifics of Canto 33, where we meet one Count Ugolino.